We're going to start today with a brief introduction to CaringKind. My name is Pam Edgar. I'm the Director of Education here at CaringKind, and we're so glad that you're here today for our webinar on understanding emotional connection and communication. So for those of you who are not familiar with CaringKind, we want to just briefly introduce ourselves. We are one of the country's oldest not-for-profit charities focused on providing care and support for families and individuals impacted by Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. Throughout our 45-plus year history, we have been one of the leading community-based organizations in the field, and we continue to launch new and innovative programs. We are based in New York City and have a national reach through virtual programs, services, and educational offerings. And you can see a little bit about who we serve. At CaringKind, we serve the spectrum of individuals, families, businesses, and communities that are touched by Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. And on the next slide, you can see a little bit about the kinds of programs that we offer. We have programs for those living with dementia and their caregiving family members and friends, for dementia care staff, professional development opportunities. We have community building opportunities, programs in multiple languages, and programs for those in particular cultural communities and affinity groups. And thanks to our donors, supporters, and robust fundraising efforts each year, we continue to offer our services free of charge to individuals and families. So we have our upcoming seminars. You see here our calendar on our education hub and our education calendar that you can visit to see our upcoming programs. You can also see, we love to connect and engage with folks. So we have offerings that are social engagement offerings, both in person and on Zoom. We also have a very exciting annual meeting that's coming Monday, March 31st, Breakthroughs in Music, Sound, and Dementia Research. This will be at the Times Center, and you can join us. We have a number of very exciting speakers. ckmeeting.org is where you can register and come to our meeting. So a few just housekeeping issues. We welcome questions. We'll save those till the end of our presentation today. The slides and recordings will be available after the lecture. We'll save our questions, as I said, to the end, but feel free to add questions in the chat at any time. And after we finish the presentation, we'll stop the gallery view, and so you can see each other. You can raise your hand virtually or in person, come off mute, and be able to ask any questions that you have. We do ask you to stay on mute for the presentation just to limit any distractions. Okay. So again, welcome. We are glad that you are here, understanding emotional connection and communication. And I can introduce myself. Well, let me let Stephani introduce herself. Stephani Shivers is here. Stephani.
Hi, everybody. It's great to be with you. I'm Stephani Shivers, and I'm the Chief Innovation Officer and Vice President of Program Development at CaringKind. I've been working in this field for a little over 18 years now with families and individuals who have been impacted by Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. I am an occupational therapist by background, second career occupational therapist, went back to school and became an OT when my youngest went to kindergarten, and he's just about to turn 30. So that gives you an idea of a little bit of my background. And I'm thrilled to be able to share this conversation with you tonight, because I think this is really meaningful. Understanding emotions and how emotions impact communication is really important work that I think is important for all of us who are in this field. So thanks for joining us this evening. And Pam, I'll kick it to you.
Thank you. So, my name is Pam Edgar. I am the Director of Education and Senior Therapeutic Specialist at CaringKind. I have 15 years experience working with individuals and families impacted by Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. I'm a licensed creative arts therapist specializing in drama therapy. I also, with a focus on emotional expression, advanced care planning, grief, and bereavement. I am a trained end-of-life doula, and I'm also a potter in my spare time. In the past couple of years, I've picked up pottery, which I really love. So, and I am also really excited to join Stephani in this conversation about emotions and communication. So we want to give you an overview of what we'll be talking about today and sort of start with why talk about emotions. Right, to frame our webinar and our conversation tonight. In our society, people are moving so quickly, it's hard to really check in on emotions. How many times has someone asked you how you're doing and you've said, oh, fine, I'm okay, good, bad? It's really without a lot of nuance. And so for people living with dementia, it can be even more difficult for them to identify their feelings and their needs. And this can make communication very difficult. So our goal for today is to spend some time discussing emotions with the hope that you can feel more empowered and equipped to identify emotions that others may not be able to identify for themselves. And so we'll talk about empathy, why empathy, why is that important, an important tool, what's validation, and then we'll also review a few other additional communication tips and tricks. So that is our goal for our time together today. And so we start with this question that we just ask you to self-reflect on. If you want to put an answer in the chat, you can. But just to even reflect to yourself on this question, what do people living with dementia feel? What do people living with dementia feel? That's going to be a lot of the focus of our conversation today. And so then next, we want to check in with you and have you think about how are you feeling today? Do a check-in. How are you feeling? And again, we see some responses in the chat, which is great. You can think about it for yourself. I'm going to look here at the chat really quickly. I'm seeing, how people with dementia are feeling confused. They feel lost. They're not sure where they are, right? And so, Stephani, how does that compare with answers that you often hear when you ask this question of people and how people with dementia feel?
So typically when we ask the question of, how do people with dementia feel, it's a lot of things like confused, scared, anxious, angry, frustrated. I've done a lot of teaching over the years and I've asked that question to a number of different people, and those types of answers tend to come to the forefront. Occasionally you'll have someone, who will say, oh, well, they feel joy, but it's almost like, is it okay to say that? And so, put that out there when we ask ourselves, well, how are you feeling today? I may be feeling, tired, but if we ask like, oh, how did you feel earlier the day? Or how do you anticipate that you're going to feel tomorrow? Oh, well, I'm happy about this thing. I'm excited. I'm going to dinner with some friends on Thursday night. I'm sad that I just learned about, another, friend who's, dealing with some health issues. And so we have kind of the full range of emotions, but we tend to, when we ask the question about, how do people with dementia feel, we're kind of already predisposed to thinking about those emotions which tend to be more on the negative side or the unhappy side of our experience. And so I put that out there because as we're talking tonight about emotions, we want to be aware of kind of our own bias to our own predisposition to think about the negative emotions being associated with people. And what we're going to be sharing and talking about tonight is emotions are emotions. And just because you get a diagnosis of Alzheimer's or dementia or mild cognitive impairment, any of them doesn't negate the full range of your emotional experience.
Thank you. Thanks, Stephanie. And so we wanted to also start with another fundamental question, which is what are emotions and what do they have to do with the brain, right? So we have a very kind of simple sketch here of the brain. And emotions are really complex functions of the brain that are experienced both physiologically and psychologically. Physiologically in the body, your heart starts beating fast, your palms start sweating, right? And psychologically, the feelings of surprise or joy or sadness, right? These are all regulated by different parts of the brain. So you have this green part, the instinctual brain, that is where the brain stem is. It's in charge of the things that we don't typically think about, breathing, blinking, our heartbeat. It's also the instinctual part of our brain where the amygdala is held, that it is our basic survival skills, right? You might heard of fight, flight, freeze. Also, there are instinctual parts of us that make us care for others, nurturing, right? So those instinctual parts are held in that brainstem area. Then there's the limbic system, the feeling brain. It's located in the middle of our brain. It's where our emotions sit, our memories, behaviors, motivation, and learning are in that part of the brain. And in the front part of the brain, it's the thinking brain, right? The prefrontal cortex. It's the brain, the part of the brain responsible for logical thinking, language, attention, reasoning, emotional regulation happens in the thinking brain. So that's the part of the brain that helps us make decisions about things. And so we can see in this next slide why this is so important to just give you a visual picture of how, as the brain changes, right? We know with Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia, it affects the brain. The cells die, different parts of the brain are more impacted. And you can see in the picture on the right with Alzheimer's disease, the impact is primarily in that feeling part of the brain. With frontotemporal dementia, there's a great impact in that thinking part, so that emotional regulation part of the brain. And the instinctual part of the brain, they're not sure exactly how much impact there is, but that remains mostly intact, right? So the instinctual fight, flight, freeze responses are still active, as well as that instinctual part of us that wants to be safe, receive care, nurture others. That is present as well. So we hope that this just gives you a little bit of a visual picture of how the brain changes and how emotions can be impacted as people progress through Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. So Stephanie, I will turn it over to you.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about, we all have a full range of experience, right? And when we're talking about being in relationship with another person, we're kind of monitoring and making decisions about how people feel or how they think. And so we've got a couple of photographs up here, and I just want to, again, ask us to look at, let's look at this, this first gentleman up here in the upper left. So what do we think he might be feeling? And actually, Pam, I may, feel free, you all can put notes in the chat if you want. And Pam and I will have a little bit of a dialogue here as we go along. But Pam, what do you think that that this gentleman might be feeling?
Yeah, I see a smile on his face, and his eyes are kind of open and smizing, as Tara Banks would say. So I'm thinking he's happy, maybe a little bit amused. Um,
Yeah, Dawn has said happy and at peace. What else might he be feeling? I think maybe satisfaction.
mm,
You know,
mhm.
are there any other words that come to mind? Oops, sorry about that.
Yeah, happy at peace, satisfaction. Um, yeah,
Maybe
maybe a little amusement, like a little bit of, delighting in something, or there might
what
be a little element of surprise there too, in his eyes. I'm not sure.
what about the woman here in the green shirt? What do you think she's feeling?
Yeah. It looks like she might be a little bored. I see the clicker in her hand, thinking,
Maybe a little, not quite frustrated, but
uh,
a
hmm,
little bit on the frustration side. What else?
frustrated. Yeah, Dorothy said frustrated. There may be a little disgust, the
Hmm.
way her mouth is
Oh,
curled.
could be. Doesn't like what she's seeing on the TV. Good, good, good.
Yeah.
And what about this woman here in the red shirt? What do you think that she might be feeling? Oops.
Dawn said for the woman in the green shirt, grumpy and uncontented. Uh,
Uncontented, that's good. Susan, confused. Yep, she could be confused. What about the woman in the red shirt with her arms like this? What do we think she might be feeling? Depressed.
depressed, depressed. Um,
So
I wonder if there might be some pain, she's holding her shoulders. Like sometimes when my shoulders are tense, I rub them. I wonder if there's some tension, some discomfort.
right. And we're not making any, we don't know what the cognitive status is of any of these people. We're just looking at them as people and trying to understand what they might be feeling, regardless of, whether they're a caregiver, whether they're just a person, and what could the range of possibilities be for what a person's feeling. And then this gentleman over here who's kind of got his hand on his head, what could he possibly be feeling? Weary, resigned, good, anxious, unsure. Nice, nice words.
Mhm.
Nice word.
Tired.
Yep, yep.
Yep. Bored,
Bored,
maybe.
right. Could be bored. Maybe pain. Maybe uncomfortable. Maybe it's got a little bit of a headache.
Hmm.
All right. So you're getting the idea here. All right, here's a few more people. What do we think? This gentleman up here with the fist. Some of you might recognize Mickey Rooney in this photograph. What do we think Mickey Rooney's feeling here? Could be anger, right? Good, angry. What else might he be?
Yeah. Rage, even like indignant.
Indignant, right, right. Maybe it's justified, right?
Hmm.
Justified anger. What about this woman over here with the cane? We tend to think like, right, angry, could be angry.
Fear. I wonder if there's some fear,
Fear, yeah, fear, could be fear.
threatened. Yeah. Someone said fear, threatened.
Right.
Yep.
Good, 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 good. And then, down here, this gentleman here, I think that he's getting $1, I think, for the Chinese New Year in his little red thing here. Uh, JPY, I'm not sure what that means, but yeah.
Joy, joy,
Hey, there we go. Joy. Yep, could be
joy.
joy. And then what about this gentleman over here?
Oh, he looks so hot to me.
Right? Could be hot.
Just uncomfortable.
Hmm. Maybe grief,
Grief.
lost.
Worry.
Sad.
Devastated, defeated, sad, and bewildered.
Great. Thanks for everybody. Thank you for all chiming in. And, and I do this because, we all kind of have an initial reaction of like, oh, I think they're feeling, I think he's feeling angry. But it might be indignant, actually might be a better word. Or and so the point of this exercise is we want to help us all to realize that people have a range of emotions, and we talk about emotions. There's so many because each one is a little bit nuanced, and I think when we feel misunderstood, we can probably all think of a time when someone has misjudged our emotional response, and that doesn't feel so great. And so I think, what we're hopeful for tonight in this conversation is that we want to help us all think about emotions in a bit larger way, because that will help us to have a more targeted relationship with people as they are living with cognitive changes. So when we think about what's going on inside of each of us as humans, inside of us as a person, there are a number of things that are happening inside of us. So we have this combination of feelings, of instincts, of physical needs, of sensory experiences. We have our background and our history. All of those things are playing out inside of us as we are reacting and interacting with other people and within our world. And so we want to talk a little bit about kind of what we would call some core emotions. So I'm going to show you over the next couple of slides. There have been a number of smart people in the world who have been studying emotions. And so the images that you're going to see on the screen in front of us, this work comes from a woman named Gloria Wilcox, and she's created this feelings wheel, which basically shows that there are 6 kind of core emotions that people have, and other emotions kind of relate to these 6 core, and I'm going to show you those in a minute. But you can see the 6 core emotions here. So we have sad, mad, scared, joyful, powerful, and peaceful. Those are the 6 cores. And you can see that they're organized in this particular, graphic, where these ones here on the top, these tend to be in these more unhappy, unpleasant experiences, whereas peaceful, powerful, joyful are on the side where those are kind of more, joyful, calming, positive experiences for us. And this is organized into what's called the secondary ring. And what you can see here is that now we begin to see which, in the broader picture, how do emotions, oops, sorry, I keep advancing that accidentally. Sorry. I can't touch my mouse once I do it. But you could see, so in the sad, in that blue range, things like feeling guilty, ashamed, depressed, lonely, bored, tired, those are all feelings that are related to this core emotion of sadness. Similar in the mad quadrant, I guess we would call it, hurt, hostile, angry, selfish, hateful, critical, those are all in the mad, related to this feeling of mad. Whereas creative, cheerful, energetic, hopeful, excited, sensuous, that's in the joyful emotional range. All right. Peaceful, content, thoughtful, intimate, loving, trusting, nurturing. Those are all kind of peaceful related emotions. So, and then here you can see kind of the third order. And so these tend to be the range of distressing or disempowering feelings that we're seeing here. So you can see things like sarcasm or frustration or irritation. Those are all within that realm of the core emotion of being mad, feeling mad. The feeling being discouraged or feeling inadequate or embarrassed, those are all related to the feeling of being scared. And then, feelings of stupidity or remorse or inferiority or isolation, those are all in that sad branch. And then on the other side, so these are kind of the range of the empowering and the comforting feelings. So being playful or fascinating, daring, those are all in that joyful range. Feeling serene or secure or pensive or responsive, those are in those peaceful place. And I want to draw your attention particularly to this yellow area here because powerful is a core emotion, but that's not something that we necessarily think about on a regular basis. Our sense of feeling powerful. For me, a better word for power is control. That's how I experience power, is a feeling of control. When I feel powerful, I feel like I'm in control. Um, and so you can see in this yellow area things like feeling confident or discerning or valuable or worthwhile or respected or proud or aware. All of those are related at the core level to this sense of power. And when we put it all together, you kind of get this broad range of emotions, but they all filter down into these kind of 6 core. And we share this with you tonight and in this conversation because when we are experiencing, particularly when we're experiencing some of these more distressive or disempowered emotions, we can begin to think about, well, how do we begin to shift that into the positive realm? And so on this particular wheel, the Wilcox wheel, which is why I like it, is you can look at the emotion that's on the opposite side of the wheel, and those are kind of the continuum of emotions. So for example, sad is a core emotion that's across from joyful. And so if a person is experiencing the sad ranges, we're trying to actually promote the joy emotions. And so that gives us a clue into how do we interact with each other. If someone, I think this is particularly helpful when we're talking about, think of yourself, when do you get angry, frustrated, jealous, irritated? When did those feelings come into play? When are you actually feeling mad? And chances are we can look at that yellow side, and it's related to things like feeling disrespected or not feeling valuable, not feeling worthwhile, not feeling successful. And so if we can reverse those and really work to infuse things like respect, infuse things like value, confidence, then we may be able to shift that mad state into a more positive power state, if that makes sense. So I like this wheel because it gives you some ideas of, oh, if someone is feeling isolated, what are we going to try to do about that? Well, it might be that we're trying to do something that's more playful or stimulating or creative, because those will begin to address the sadness. All right, does that make sense? I realize that it's a lot of information to kind of take in, but I want to put it out there and kind of let you sit with it, because when you're starting to talk about how do we interact and communicate with people living with dementia, I think that this understanding what the emotions are and what those emotions are related to, I think can be particularly helpful. And I just want to say, pause for a second here. So this conversation that we're having tonight, which is on emotions and communication, we have kind of a part 2 of this that's really going to be looking at distress and how do you understand distress in people living with dementia, and begin to kind of decode that, and why do people experience distress and what can we do about it. And so more to come on that, but we wanted to just kind of give you a little bit of taste of this as we move into that. This really lays the foundation. Understanding what the emotions can be really helps us to tease out those kind of distressing situations. So I want to talk a little bit about how do we begin to frame this, because we have these emotions inside of us, right? We have these feelings, and they tend to come out in the way that we interact with the world. And so we all engage in actions, right? And so an action that we take is something that we do out of a need or desire. So we can, we need to go shopping. I need something to put my groceries in. And so I grab the cart, I take action with the grocery cart. I need to make a phone call. The action is me actually dialing the phone. Not dialing anymore. Now it's not even pressing buttons anymore. Now we're just speaking into the phone, right? Call mom. So an action is something that we do. A reaction is something that we do in response to someone or to something. We see the stoplight, we stop. We may react to getting a shot. We may adjust ourselves when we need to go to the restroom. Those are reactions. And then an expression is really, how do we express ourselves? And all of us express ourselves in different ways. You see me gesticulating all the time. Like, I'm a hands person. I get talking, the more excited I get, the more my hands start to go. I end up like fading out of my, thing oftentimes because, I'm moving around too much. So we all have ways that we act, react, and that we express ourselves. That kind of help us to identify who we are and give you, some of its personality, some of its actions, et cetera, et cetera. So we have actions, reactions, and expressions. So again, our actions are our outward responses based on our experience with the world, and our actions and reactions and expressions are all ways that we communicate and interact with the world. And the question, I put this up here because all of us are acting on a daily basis. We have actions that we're doing. We have reactions that we're having. We're expressing ourselves. And when we don't have a label of Alzheimer's or dementia, people look at us and they call those feelings, or, it's like, oh, they're tired, or they're not feeling well, or they're really happy or excited about that. Just like we did in the photographs, we actually labeled those emotions as we were seeing what people were doing. But what tends to happen when somebody gets a diagnosis of Alzheimer's or dementia is that their actions, reactions, and expressions begin to be viewed through a different lens. So just like at the beginning, when I asked the question, what do people with dementia feel? We begin to limit or restrict what the feeling range is based on that label. Let me show you an example. So here's some photographs of people acting reacting, and expressing themselves. Right? So over here we have Magic Mike kind of expressing himself. We have Sean Penn reacting to the paparazzi. We have Clint Eastwood who's expressing himself. He's doing something. And then we have, this is Picasso who's providing an action. So we look at these and we could put labels and feelings. We could say, here's the action, the reaction, or how they're expressing themselves. But if they had dementia, we would probably put these types of terms on them. And so I ask the question again, are actions, reactions, and expressions valid? Are their actions and reactions in these photographs? Are their expressions valid? Yes, and so are the actions, reactions, expressions, and feelings and emotions of a person living with dementia. There is a wonderful group called the Eden Alternative that has been working very intensely with families impacted by dementia individuals, living in nursing home environments for sure for probably about 30 years now. And about 25 years ago, there was a big movement to take a look at quality of life in nursing homes. And quality of life indicators and measures were really coming on board. And Bill Thomas and the team that he was working with at the Eden Alternative, they were the first ones to really say, you can't use these traditional measures for determining a person living with dementia's quality of life, because the categories that you're looking at don't work for this population. And so they set out to identify really, how do you determine what quality of life looks like for a person living with dementia? And they really changed the nursing home experience by saying nursing homes need to not be these institutions. They really need to be homes that include things like plants and children and meaningful, things for people to do, and people need to be able to get outside and to have relationships, and children need to be around. And all of those things came out of this body of work with the Eden Alternative. And as that work has evolved over the years, they identified what they call these domains of well-being. And you can see in this pyramid here, or this triangle here, at the bottom is, you see identity and connectedness there. Identity, feeling like you are known, is that's a feeling, right? We could go back to the feeling wheels and we could identify what are the words that make a person feel like they are known, that they're a person, that they have a history, they have an identity. What are the feeling connected is a critical piece of who we are as human beings, being connected to other people, being connected to ourselves, being connected to nature, God, the environment, you name it, that we have this innate, we want to have a feeling of connectedness, and that those are two core experiences that are necessary for then people to be able to experience a feeling of security, a feeling of autonomy, which is being able to kind of have control and to have power over your own life. And then we get into this space of meaning and growth, which is about hope and having purpose and value. And then finally, joy. And what they found is that, these domains of well-being really do build on each other. And they have this kind of foundational layer of identity and connectedness. And these feelings then build upon each other for someone to experience a quality of life, or to have a sense of well-being versus to have a sense of ill-being. And so I put this up here because I think that when we're talking about people's feelings, and we're talking about, living with, caring for, loving somebody, or interacting with someone who's living with cognitive changes, what's our goal? Our goal is to be able to meet on this feeling connection so that we can ultimately promote an experience of well-being. So hopefully this is helpful. And I think Pam's got some, is going to talk to us a little bit more about some of the ways that we can interact practically. And Pam, it looks like I may be able to play this video here, so we could try it from there.
Okay, great. And if you can't, I will. But so going back to the last slide for just a second, the tools that care partners can use, two of the biggest tools are empathy and validation to create this sense of well-being. So we want to talk a little bit about those two in more depth. And we'll start with a video by Brene Brown, a narrated by Brene Brown, who's a qualitative researcher who's done a lot of research on shame and resilience and vulnerability. And she talks here about the difference between sympathy and empathy and the importance of empathy.
See if this works.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with "at least." Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Yeah, I think that's so powerful, the connection and the empathy, that model of really understanding the emotion, right? So what we did in the beginning and looking at those images and trying to figure out what a person's feeling, it's not so much about getting it right, about being right, but about really understanding the nuances and what that is for the other person. And that leads to validation, right? Once we have that piece of empathy, that understanding of what it's like to be in another person's shoes, what their perspective is, how they're feeling, then we are able to validate their experience. And validation is the recognition or affirmation that a person or their feelings or their opinions are valid and worthwhile, right? So validation is about being present, just like we saw in the video, being there with the other person, being present, instead of trying to fix or problem solve. That might come a little bit later, that might be needed. Sometimes problem solving is important, but validation, that connection piece, that sharing that empathy with the other so they can feel known and understood, that comes first, right? And with that comes that acceptance and respect. And I think this is really important, and this has been very helpful for me. Validation doesn't mean you agree with the other person. You can accept and respect their point of view, even if you don't agree with it. And frankly, for someone with dementia who may be relating to a different moment in time or may have a different experience than your experience, you may not agree with what they're saying. You know, they may be saying, you know, it's a different day of the week or something else is going on, but you, through validation, can accept and respect their point of view and their perspective, right? Validation is normalizing, saying, it makes sense that you feel that way. I understand. I would feel that way too. That makes a lot of sense. Instead of minimizing, you know, oh, you're making a mountain out of a molehill. Don't, you know, it's not that bad. Validation is also seeking to understand instead of guessing and moving on. So, oh, well, you're feeling frustrated. Okay. All right, let's move on. You know, you're feeling frustrated. Okay, let me understand more about that. Okay. And you're feeling a little confused too. Oh gosh, this is really actually very scary for you. You lost your credit card and you're frustrated because you can't find it, but you're also scared about what this means, you know, for your bank account. Did someone steal it? And you're also thinking, you know, what might be happening with me? Why did I lose this? Right? So it's a lot of feelings that can be there. And if you stay with someone, then you can really get to the nuance of what's going on for them. And then you can really get to listening for that underlying need. As Stephanie was referring to, that opposite part of the wheel. What is the need underneath? Right? Instead of giving advice, really understanding what that need might be. So then you can find ways to start working toward meeting it. And some signs that validation, that a person is feeling validated, you know, like how do you know that it's working? If you're trying to validate someone, how do you know if it's landing for them, right? And some signs might be the person might make eye contact or might look up or look at you in a slightly different way. Their body might start off tense and you might see them relax a little bit or sigh. They might be more open and easier to approach. And there might be something that indicates, you know, security. They might be willing for you to touch their hand, you know, gentle touch, or have that sense of security and increased engagement. So that those are some signs and cues that a person may be feeling validated. And so we have another video clip for you. We're going to set up here. This is from a film that came out a few years ago. You may have seen. It's called Inside Out. It's a movie about emotions, actually. And in this, it's an animated film, and we're going to see the characters of Joy, Sadness, and Bing Bong. And it's a children's, you know, it's made for children, but it's one of those animated films that really gets to the heart of something pretty quickly. So this is a 2-minute clip that really shows these two different approaches, right? A validation approach and more of a redirection or distraction approach. So go ahead and let's play it, Steph.
We may have an ad, so I apologize in advance first.
Okay.
Oh, the stuffed animal Hall of Fame! My rocket! Wait, Riley and I were still using that rocket. It still has some song power left. Who's your friend who likes to play? No, you can't take my rocket to the dump. Riley and I are going to the moon. Riley can't be done with me.
Hey, it's gonna be okay. We can fix this. We just need to get back to headquarters. Which way to the train station?
I had a whole trip planned for us.
Hey, who's ticklish, huh? Here comes the tickle monster. Hey, Bing Bong, look at this. Oh, here's a fun game. You point to the train station and we all go there. Won't that be fun? Come on, let's go to the train station.
I'm sorry they took your rocket. They took something that you loved. It's gone. Forever.
Sadness. Don't make him feel worse.
Sorry.
It's all I had left of Riley.
I bet you and Riley had great adventures.
Oh, they were wonderful. Once we flew back in time. We had breakfast twice that day.
Sadness.
It sounds amazing. I bet Riley liked it.
Oh, she did. We were best friends.
Yeah, it's sad.
I'm okay now. Come on. The train station is this way.
How did you do that?
I don't know. He was sad, so I listened to what...
Hey! There's the train!
Oh, we made it! We're finally gonna get home! Oh no, these facts and opinions look so similar.
Ah, don't worry about it. Happens all the time.
So what did you, if you want to put any things that you noticed there in the chat from that, right? But you could see, Joy is trying to distract, right? She has a task and an agenda in mind. She needs to get to the train station. There are things to do, right? And this is so true to life. There are things to do. And Bing Bong can't move on, right? And when sadness sits with him, you can see as she starts to say, my gosh, this is a big loss. You feel sad. He starts to open up. He starts to share. You can hear somebody asked in the chat about if someone's not physically present, how can you hear that what are some signs and symbols you can hear in their voice? He's more engaged. He starts to share his story more. He starts to experience, she loved it, right? Like it's sad, but he also has this thing that he's recalling that was happy. So the emotions become more mixed, right? You could hear, and then he has that emotional release of the sadness because he feels really heard and seen and can express that in the moment. So you need to be understanding of what is happening at the moment, not just brush it under the carpet. Yep. That present moment awareness and meeting the person where they are in that moment is what we see in that.
I'm the master of silver lining. I heard that Brene Brown, talk years ago, and I catch myself in the moment where I'm saying like, "Oh, I'm silver lining this," and having to, unpack that and to rewind that and say, because it's more comfortable. I'm a fixer, right? Hello, I'm an occupational therapist by background, right? I'm in program development, innovation. It's all about making things better and the fix. And so that's my go-to is to make it better, which is comes, complete. I have to really work at validating and having empathy. And the good news is it's a skill you can develop. It's not something that, doesn't come natural for many of us. And when you're in the throes of, giving care and trying to help manage the life of someone else, it's often very difficult to come from that place of empathy and validation. And so, I tipped my hand at the little bit at the beginning of this talk when I said this is such important information, I think. And I'm talking to myself because understanding emotions and how to actually honor the emotions in another person is really critical work in relating to people in general, and particularly important when you're relating to someone who's living with a changing brain, brain and thinking abilities.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
teach us how to do it.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Stephanie. And I definitely relate to that. I am a problem solver, like, okay, how do we solve this problem? What do we need? Where do we go? And yeah, the slowing down and being with, right? And so that's what this slide shows, some of those sentence stems that you can think about, and showing understanding for the emotion. It sounds to me like you're feeling sad. Am I getting that right? I can understand why you're feeling angry about this. It makes sense, right? We talked about that before, like the normalizing. It makes sense that you feel that way. It makes sense that you think this. You're having a sad, tough, bad, exciting, joyful, scary day. So those are some ways to validate. And the next slide has some more sentence stems. Um, this must be really difficult for you. You have every right to feel that way. I would feel that way too. I can only imagine how frustrating that is. I can only imagine how scary that feels for you. It's completely normal to feel this way, right? That normalizing that feeling, validating not only the emotion, naming the emotion that the person might have, but that it makes sense that they have it. They have a right to feel that way. Yeah, you're feeling really disrespected right now, and it's not fair. And I think we might want to think about doing something about it. Do we want to think about what that might look like? Those kinds of things can be helpful in validating. And again, before validating, especially if someone is very angry or frustrated or irritated, there may need to be a moment to diffuse and de-escalate, right? So in those difficult situations that can happen where someone might be blaming you for something, taking a breath, taking the blame sometimes. I'm sorry, even if it's not your fault, just diffusing. I'm so sorry. Will you forgive me? I'm so sorry this happened, right? You're right. You're right. And this is not fair, and you're right. And I'm so sorry I did that. And go with the flow. I like this, sing let it go to yourself. You're going with a flow, you're being present with that person. Some other ideas for communication. are simplifying communication in different ways, right? So there are both verbal and nonverbal components, giving the person your full attention, making soft eye contact with them, watching your pacing, speaking slowly, using simple sentences, or if you're asking a question, asking one question at a time instead of, what happened? Why are you so angry? What's going on here? Like, tell me a little bit about what happened, and letting them answer. Pause and wait for the response, giving plenty of time. Some studies have shown that it can take, up to about 20 seconds for someone with dementia to process information and be able to respond. So giving some time, and that's uncomfortable. If I was just quiet now, Stephanie and I were just quiet for 20 seconds, people would be thinking, something happened to the Zoom. We usually don't have that kind of pause in our speech. So giving that time, acknowledge what the person is saying, go along with the person's beliefs, use words of encouragement. Thank you for sharing that with me. Thank you for telling me how you feel. It's really important for me to know that. Also the nonverbal communication, thinking about your facial expressions, thinking about how you're standing, your body posture, right? I am someone who, when I worked in the nursing home, I was cold all the time. So I was very often, standing with my arms crossed and my shoulders up to my ears. Well, that for me means I'm cold, but if you see me standing like this, what are you thinking that my emotions are at the time, right? People might think I'm angry, or that I'm angry with them, or frustrated, or that I'm anxious and nervous, right? But I'm not feeling any of those things. I'm just cold and trying to warm myself up, right? So thinking about how your body is, how you're communicating non-verbally can be really helpful as well. And Stephanie's going to share a couple of resources.
So there's a group in Canada that's called the Research Institute for Aging, and they've worked over the years with a number of people who are living with dementia and their family care partners to create these little booklets that are called the By Us, For Us guides. And this particular one that you see on the screen here, this is one that's called Enhancing Communication. And this is actually written by people living with dementia. And I share this for you, and I've got the link there. You can download these for free. I'm going to show you on the next slide too. There's about, I think, 15 different guides now. You can order them and get the little booklets. We've got some in the office, but you can download them for free. These are wonderful resources for you. And so this one on enhancing communication, I thought that I'd just pull out a few items from this. And so these are some of the ideas that people living with dementia, some of their strategies for family and friends, for caring family members and friends. And so they're saying here, what do they want from a communication standpoint? Speak directly to me. Do not talk to me as though you were speaking to a child. Ask me what I'm experiencing, how I'm feeling, and validate what I'm saying. Treat me in the same way you would want to be treated in the same situation. Acknowledge that you do not totally understand, but that you're trying. And pay attention to nonverbal cues and body language, such as eyes and hands. So those are just, some kind of quick tips for tonight. But again, this is a great little book, and Pam's put the link for that in the chat now, so you can link on that and bookmark it to get to those pages. And then this is just kind of a little bit of a summary, so you can see what some of the other guides are here. They have a lot of tips and strategies, and so they're like little workbooks as well. Very helpful resource for you, and a number of different topics. We use these a lot. And so, I want to just kind of wrap us up. Actually, I'm going to let you wrap us up, Pam.
Sure. We're wrapping up with this quote today by Maya Angelou. People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And it's so important and true. And the reality that I've experienced many times is that there were people I worked with in different locations who didn't remember my name or didn't remember exactly who I was or my relationship when I was, on their unit, but they knew I was a safe person for them. And when they saw me, they would smile and relax a little bit. And so people will know how you make them feel. We also want to, as we end tonight and start to move into a question and answer time, we just want to acknowledge the complexity of relationships, and how relationships can change when someone is living with dementia. Every situation is unique, and we recognize that the tips and techniques we discussed today might not always work for everyone, or may be really difficult for someone because they're in a difficult situation. We just want to acknowledge that and say, if that applies to you, please call our helpline. These situations can be very nuanced. They're hard to talk about in public settings, but we are here. Our navigators are here to talk one-on-one about specific circumstances in order to provide the right level of support. So we want you to, you can call a navigator. I'm going to put some information in the chat as well that you can call our helpline. You can go to our website, and we also have a direct link where you can book with a navigator, if that would be helpful to you. So
Just a
thank you.
reminder for everyone that our services are free of charge. They're confidential, and so you can call us. You can go to our website. You can actually, if you say you want to talk to somebody, you'll click on it, and then you can get a link to actually schedule a time that's convenient for your schedule to have a conversation with someone.